Coming up on this week's FAS TV. We're back at the Strathspey Monitor Farm to find out how the Smiths have got on with trialling virtual fence technology with their bulling heifers on a species-rich hill which requires targeted grazing for biodiversity. We learn more from Peter Beattie, Monitor Farm's North Regional Advisor, about the Monitor Farms and their use of virtual fencing to enable farmers to optimise pasture use. And we also hear from NatureScot's Elliot on how important the use of the virtual fence technology has been in managing the species-rich hill at Auchernack, as she describes some of the many plant species which are benefiting from cattle grazing the hill while enhancing sustainability on farm.
Scottish Government make possible a number of innovation projects within the funded Monitor Farm programme, and we've combined a bit of that funding to produce a project looking at virtual fencing. 4 farms across Scotland, 4 Monitor Farms. That's Argyllshire, South Ayrshire, Stirling and here at Strathspey were chosen. Each was given 25 collars and support from Mono, the company, to help set up these collars and then see how each of these farms would then use them. They're all looking to increase the availability, I think, of ground that they could use. I think if you look at perhaps previous users such as Rob Wainwright on Call, who's been a great supporter of this as well, he set the scene for saying that people could access some potentially hundreds of acres of unused ground. But at the same time, as with here at Strathspey and with the other Monitor Farms, not only does it give access to ground that was previously unfenced or perhaps where the fences were in poor order, but it also gives an opportunity to be able to track and trace the cattle quickly. So it's partly accessing new grazing ground, it's managing that grazing ground well, particularly for wildlife and for accessing ground that was perhaps rough grazing and improving that ground by the use of grazing cattle. But it's also enhancing biodiversity, but it's also too, with this example here, bringing the cattle, the heifers, closer to the bull and keeping them within a more defined area than if they just put them up into a 200-hectare hill and hope that each of these fertile heifers would be caught by the bull. When we came here in April, the heifers, a number of the heifers had already been trained in the in-by ground to respect the noise that the mono collars were giving to show that they were coming close to this virtual fence that was set up by Hamish and Callum, the sons of Malcolm Smith, the Monitor farmer here. And this is part two of bringing the sons more fully into the decision making of the business, to give them that particular opportunity to manage these cattle on the hill. The benefits, I'd say, were that when we went onto the hill in April, it was April 23rd they were put out, it was a very dry spring. Grass was, I think, in short supply here, so it gave them access to a whole amount of upland grasses, species rich and I think quite nutrient rich. Talking with Malcolm, it was possibly up to 8 years before since the last cattle were on that hill. So there was a lot of dead material from that winter and previous winters there. And the fire risk was enormous. It was a very, very dry spring. We had pine woodland, commercial pine woodland on one side, and we had establishing Scots pine woodland on the RSPB site at the other. And any of these sites were just a fire risk, as we saw later on in the year to the north of here, where there were substantial fires. So what we saw very quickly with the cattle on the hill was just how quickly they knocked down and disrupted and broke up that mat. And from that, you saw new grass, green, moist grass establish. And I would say that pretty quickly reduced the potential for a fire risk on that hill. It's not uncommon to see that on ungrazed ground across Strathspey. And I think that risk is not just here but elsewhere too. Well, the whole farm here is exceptional for biodiversity. I mean, there is Cairngorm's Nature Farm Award won by the Smiths, and they're very passionate about their approach to nature here. The hill itself is incredibly species rich, biodiverse, huge range of habitats. The opportunity for the collars is to rotationally graze across that, selecting areas that need grazing for species richness, but at the same time provide good feed throughout the summer for heifers or for any other cattle that they choose to put there. So we did a survey in 2023 with Anne Elliot of NatureScot that showed that species richness. We identified over 100 species of plant there alone. A spring survey showed another 50 or so potential breeding birds, and another survey by Butterfly Conservation across the farm demonstrated another 200 moths and butterflies in the area. So this is an incredibly species rich and diverse farm, which is still a commercial livestock farm. I think some of the successes here that we've seen by bringing a bull close into the heifers has been replicated elsewhere, where the cows have been kept in close to bulls. Accessing ground, for instance, in Argyll, well, in fact, on all the farms potentially has been a great benefit. Now, it's really worth, if you're looking at doing something like any of these virtual fencing collars, to estimate how much of your ground you've got that is unused at the moment, and is unused either because of labour challenges, you can't get to them enough because it's very difficult to find livestock, or that you've got problems with fencing. So I think an analysis right at the beginning is this: they are expensive in a way, relatively expensive, but not compared with putting up extensive amounts of fencing and making sure that you can maintain that fencing, which is particularly challenging in any hill ground, but particularly here where you've seen some huge snowfalls and storms in the past. On this farm there's been good connectivity. We've got a good mobile signal, which you need, and you need good signal for GPS. So it works as a combination of, you set the virtual fencing on your mobile phone through your phone signal, through your 4G or whatever, and it tracks the cattle through GPS. We've been delighted, I think, even coming into the lower light levels of autumn, we're now sitting in October here, to see that the charges on a number of these collars are still they're still fully charged, and I think that's there's a real benefit from having the solar panels on the top of the unit, as long also with the signal being at the top and a weight keeping them in place. I think that's a real positive for the collars. Also, adaptations to the collar, such as movement sensors, I think is going to be a real addition. So the cow is alive but it's not moving. We are discussing options such as monitor sensors, so that the cow may be seen as moving physically but not moving very far across a patch, and that then sending off an alert to say that cow is not there with the rest of the herd, or it's not moving in the way that animal should move, which would show more than just a collar falling off. But overall, and particularly at Auchernack, I would say that virtual fencing collars have made a significant difference. I think they've been used really well by Hamish and Callum. They've adapted what the virtual fencing app gives them to make sure that they can rotate cattle across that hill ground easily. They've managed to organise them well, trained them well at the very beginning. I think they're really good exemplars of how a system like this works commercially, and I think it is a game changer potentially for people who have open hill ground or moorland, which can be used for grazing and take some of the pressure off fairly precious in-by ground.
Here at Auchernack, we've been trialling the Monal virtual fencing as part of the Monitor Farm programme, and we've had we've got 22 beasts up the hill just now, and we started off with 9 of our heifers, and they went up here around April time, and they've been up here ever since. We've had another 14 join them, and yeah, they've been doing well up here, grazing the grass, which we've not been able to graze for the last few years, and it's been good to see a bit more of our ground being used for grazing. And when we've had less grass elsewhere in this dry year, it's been quite good to see them getting a bit more use out of our ground. I've been really impressed with how the monal system's worked. It's been great for signal wise. We've not had any interruptions with that. Only a few snags we had a couple of our heifers lose their collars, just being too slack and them able to get them off. We've been able to take those individual heifers into a pen, reapply them. We had a situation where we had two of our heifers, they were on. We reapplied them a bit too tightly and we could see visible signs of chafing, but we were able to take them in and adjust the collars accordingly, and we've seen them healing up quite nicely as well, so that's been quite good to see. We've been quite impressed with the monal collars. They've been able to maintain their charge right through summer, which wasn't a surprise, but even now into October, we're still seeing 99, 100% throughout the day, so it's quite impressive. It's been able to keep itself at that level, even with the shorter days. That might change come November, December time, but we're intending to leave the cows out as long as possible, and if we do start seeing an overall decline in charge, we'll be thinking about taking them in, but that's not required just yet. We had our shorthorn bull running with the 9 other heifers here, and I was quite impressed with how he was able to keep with the heifers, and we kept the paddock quite small, so they weren't able to get away from him, and yeah, every time we were up in the morning checking them, we were usually seeing him with a beast, so quite confident that he's been able to get round everyone and get them all served. We fitted one of the monal fence collars onto the bull as well, so we were able to keep track of him, and even just by checking the phone we could see that he was with the cows pretty much all the time, so yeah, if he wasn't with them you would be able to notice that through the app. Another benefit we had from the monal fencing, we were able to check that one of our heifers was unwell, and we noticed that it was a good distance away from the rest of the herd and hadn't been moving for quite a while, so we were able to pick up on that and then come and catch the heifer and take her down to the farm to treat her. If they had been out without the collars on, we might not have been able to see that and catch it as early as we did. They were, you're able to check it from your house or whatever, so you can see if there's something strange, you'll pick up on it quite quickly. I found it very easy to use the monal app to move the cows and put them onto areas that they hadn't been on previously, or expand areas that they have been on, or even keep them off of areas that we've been either in a scheme or some historical significance, just to stop them damaging or interrupting with those areas. I think we'll probably continue with putting the heifers up here and bulling them over the summer. It's a good bit of spare ground for us, and it keeps them away from other bulling groups and other cows, and it's been great to see them using this ground which we've not been able to use.
Well, when we came out to the hill here and had a look, I looked from a distance and I thought, okay, it's a perfectly nice hill, and we walked across it and just got more and more excited by just how rich it was. It's just wonderful. Both the combination of the different species which are here, and also some of the rare and scarce species which are here. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it's because we've got flushing coming through, and that's bringing some richness to the soils, which is meaning you've got a lot more variety of species than you might have in some places. But also, I think you've just got a variety of conditions in different places, which means that there's a lot of variety of habitat types. So for example, you've got some rare and scarce species. For example, we found world caraway here, which we knew was here, so it wasn't a surprise to find it. That had been found by other people, but I just couldn't believe the amount of it. And that's a white flower, which is maybe 1 metre tall. Not a little small one, that, and it's just scattered all over a lot of the hill that we can see here. Now that's not really a rare species out west. It's not uncommon in terms of distribution out west, but you come up to the east side of the country and it's really rare. There's only a few places where it grows. So that was really exciting to find that here. Peter and I were out looking this summer at bits of the hill, and we found a patch of frog orchids, just a wonderful group of frog orchid, which are really easy to overlook because they're a green flower, and you can imagine a green flower on a green background is really not that easy to see, but that's wonderful. And then another species that we found was quaking grass, which is really quite rare in this part of the world. You tend to find it in places with a richer, more base-rich soil. And it has a flower which comes up, and the little seed heads are so fine, and the way that it's grown, that in the wind it shakes, a bit like aspen leaves, very similar to aspen leaves, hence the name quaking grass. One of the reasons why I think this is so good and so special is its past and present management, and the key thing about that is really the cattle and the cattle grazing, and the fact it's been grazed by cattle for a long time. There have been sheep here as well, but I think the cattle are part of the key part of that. And the reason for that is with the cattle, when they're grazing, they're taking down the grasses and they're stopping it building up into a thatch. And that means that the smaller species, when they set seed or when the seeds drop, there are bare patches that the seeds can drop into, and they can germinate, and the young seedlings can survive and grow because the cattle have taken down the grass a bit, and it's not just very, very thick. So it cuts back on the competition of the more vigorous grasses. And it also means that you don't get a thatch. So if you didn't graze this for a few years, you quite quickly get quite a thick thatch. And that thatch makes it much more difficult for the more delicate flowers to set seed and grow and survive. So really it's key to the management of this bit of land. The exciting thing about the collars here and the way the collars are being used on the cattle is that it really opens up bits of grassland like this, but lots of farms have areas of grassland that might not be fenced, or the fence might not be stop-proof anymore. And by using the collars, it means that the cattle can be put in, which means that it can really benefit whatever other farms have. And a lot of farms do have areas which are quite species rich, and really benefit that kind of habitat without the cost of fencing or repairing the fencing that's already there. So it means there's a lot more flexibility. The cattle can be moved very easily. You're not having to invest in the very expensive fencing, and the farmer has control, day-to-day control on what's done and where the cattle go. So really it's a great new technology that I think will open up a lot of areas, because there is some abandonment of some of the upland areas in the Cairngorms, and where you get agricultural abandonment, that's really not great for the species-rich grassland like this, but also for things like breeding waders. So having grazing is much better for the breeding waders as well, and it means that it's a much higher quality habitat. The benefits of cattle grazing in a habitat like this extends a lot further than just the flowers. So it can benefit the breeding waders, particularly things like lapwing, oystercatcher. Curlew, of course, is a really important one at the moment. The curlew population in the Cairngorms is relatively good compared to a lot of the rest of the country. So it's a really important place for curlew. But also for insects, because you've got all these flowers. There's flowers for the insects to feed on, and also the plants for the larval stages, caterpillars, to feed on with all of the insects. It's great for butterflies. When we were here in midsummer, there were lots of butterflies out and flying here. It was great to see. But also it opens up little patches which are good for the lizards and for any amphibians that are here, so that they can physically get through, and also they can find sunning places, There's places for things like lizards to sun in the morning. So when you live in an area and it's your day-to-day, I think we often take areas for granted, but actually what we're looking out on every day could be really important and really valuable for nature conservation and for wildlife. So it's really good for time to step back and just have a look at what's there and be aware of just how good it might be.
Well, and I think what we both agree here is that this ground here is so species rich. Not as when you see species rich grassland, the grasses themselves are incredibly diverse. I mean, I've just been picking up a few different grasses on a plantain here, and we've got seed heads from 8 different grasses here, all natives. Not a single timothy, no ryegrass, no cocksfoot in this field here. And yet this is what these cattle are not just grazing on, but doing well on. If you're excluding animals from this, you don't get this turnover. And if you can look at some of the manures, you don't get the nutrient turnover as well. That's important for what I think you've identified in Pat's here, is more base-rich, less acid soils, fed by these probably mineral-rich flushes.
I think that's right. Cattle are just fundamental to maintaining this kind of an area.
Oh, let's admire the devil's bit scabious. This is beautiful, isn't it? It's just such a delicate plant. And again, good for what? Butterflies, bees, any pollinators really.
This species is really important for small scabious mining bee,
Wow.
which is one of the specialist species that you get in this area. So without this, that kind of bee wouldn't be here at all.
Yep.
But it's also good for lots of other insects.
And look, you're seeing here as well, you know, even in amongst where there's no manures, you're seeing this low thatch. And I mean, these are not the flowers, of course. The fungi exist below ground, and will be there whether there's a fruiting body or not. But it's the very fact that you can see the fruiting body, and the fact that that fruit is then available to the spores are able to be blown around, isn't it? Because if this was thick thatch, they'd probably be there and nothing would happen.
Yes, it would be much harder for them. You can see how small that is. If there was a thick thatch of vegetation, that wouldn't be able to push up through it probably.
I think finally Anne and I would agree here that this is probably one of the perfect examples of just the appropriate amount of grazing for this hill in its first year. I mean, this was back in April, a mat of white but very, very combustible grasses, and what we've seen is that the cattle have grazed this without poaching it. They've grazed it without damaging it, and in the process of laid down manures of different ages, which brings nourishment, vitality, and probably seeds back into the area. And yet at the same time you can see that the cattle themselves, for everybody who's a livestock farmer thinks, oh well, nature's one thing, but what's happening to my cattle? They are grazing this ground effectively, and by the look at the manures, they've come back over this on several occasions, and they've taken nourishment from this, the grass mixed in amongst the heather. And as I say again, I think with the cattle just over the top of the hill there, the benefits to these cattle are obvious. They look great. They've grown and they look great now, and this is, to me, a perfect example of how to manage this particular type of hill, of which there'll be many examples of this mix of grass and heath across the Cairngorms National Park area. Would you agree, Anne, with all of that?
Yes, I think that's right, and you can see that the heather's more or less untouched. That's not been grazed, but all the grasses have been taken right down, which is a good example of what we were talking about before, that the vigorous grasses do get grazed because that's what the cattle like, and it's created lots of opportunities for other flowers to seed in and grow into the gaps between the more vigorous grasses.
And the grasses will come away again next year with that same vigour, and that grazing pattern will be repeated again. And yet at the same time you'd expect probably in springtime and through early summer a greater diversity, or at least a greater number of flowering plants here.
That's right.
Benefiting everything.